Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And today's episode is brought to you by our Patreon family. Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. For example, if we record one episode where I'm still in the studio and Spoon is on the beach, if you're a Patreon member, you'll see it. What's up, Spoon?
Well, I am here on location, you could say, in Villas, New Jersey, a little northwest of Cape May. A very nice, lovely little neighborhood, one block from the bay side of the beach, with its famous horseshoe crabs, and a short ride to the real fun beaches at Cape May. But I'm taking some time out to do a podcast for Martins and More.
I never ever understood how crabs could play horseshoes.
Well, don't try to play horseshoes with horseshoe crabs. They won't like it.
What about playing horseshoes against horseshoe crabs?
That would be more your speed.
Over and under on well, never mind. All right, let's get into the program. Today is actually going to be a twofer. First of all, shame on both of us. We didn't get to squeeze in 20 questions on the last episode, so that's going to have to happen today. Maybe we could even begin the show with that. And then we do have two topics. If you guys remember last season, we asked you guys nicely, what should we talk about? You guys told us a lot of great ideas, and two of those ideas are, and I quote, JW writes, how does a person who plays for a living retain his joy of playing, not let it become a job? I don't know. And the second question is, from Bob, gloss versus satin. Now, I'd rather talk about satin versus gloss, but Bob is a good friend of ours, so we're going to talk about gloss versus satin. Spoon, now that you know all of the items on today's docket, what do you want to do first?
Well, when you're referring to gloss versus satin or satin versus gloss, are we talking about like tooth polish? Or are we talking about car polish? Or are we talking about guitar finishes?
I assume car polish, but why don't you talk about tooth polish? I'll talk about car polish. And there they go, all of our listeners. Nice to see you. All right. We're going to start today with 20 questions. I'm going to make an executive decision. I'm in a real hurry to play this game. Do I know which one asks and which one guesses? No, I don't, but let me just think of that. I think the last 3 times we played, we got it backwards, so it should feel pretty easy to do right now. Do you remember which one of us does which part?
I think the last time I had the guitar, because I was worried that I had given you misinformation, and you eventually got it anyway. So,
all right. So this time I'll think of the guitar, and Spoon will tell you the rules.
That's right. This is 20 questions. This is the game that we love to play, where one of us, in this case the smart guy, being Maury, is thinking up a Martin guitar that's available for sale somewhere in the United States at this very moment, and probably many places. And I, the wise guy, must guess what guitar that is through asking up to 20 questions before I'm officially stumped. I can guess 3 different models, but they count as part of those 20 questions. And so is the Swami conjuring a guitar in his mind at this moment?
I have thought of a guitar, 20 questions on the clock, and go.
Is this guitar made in Mexico?
No.
Okay, so it's not made at Navajo. That means it's got to be made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. So that limits it down to a big bunch of guitars. Is this guitar made with the dreadnought body shape?
Yes.
Ooh, that narrows it down to, I don't know how many dreadnought models are there. So, does this guitar have a rosewood back and sides?
Yes.
So, is this guitar made with the traditional high-gloss nitrocellulose finish?
The finish is satin.
I see. Is this guitar found under Martin's current category of limited or special editions?
No.
So it's a satin finished dreadnought that's made in Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
I just said it wasn't made in Mexico. I don't know where it's made.
And so, how many guesses are we up to now? Jeez.
6.
I lost track. So, Mexico, dreadnought.
Dovetail.
I didn't ask that.
Yeah.
So,
You asked if it was made in the traditional dovetail neck joint. I said yes.
no, I said no, I most certainly did not. But thank you for that. That helps a lot because that just wiped out all of the satin finished dreadnoughts. So is this an artist limited artist model, custom artist model, whatever they call them these days?
No. That's the look I want. That's the expression we're going for, folks.
Does this guitar have a spruce top?
Yes.
Does this guitar have artwork printed or painted on the spruce top?
Literally, the word artwork will make me say no 9 questions. It's not a painting.
Okay.
It's not scenery. It's not a portrait. It's not. I'm not trying to lead the witness, but it's not.
All right. Well, let me put it this way: does this guitar feature one of Martin's sunburst finishes?
No.
Okay. So that's just double checking that. So we are talking about a model that has a satin finish. Is this the D-Boke?
No. 12 questions.
Ooh, because that would qualify for everything we just talked about.
That's
satin
mahogany.
finish. It is mahogany. Oh, you're right. Sorry. I was thinking I was caught up in the whole finish business. But,
It's okay.
okay. Now you got me really stumped because satin finish, full dovetail neck joint, and I can't think, and I think the Boke maybe not even had the full dovetail neck joint. I can't think of a guitar that qualifies for that. So, and it also clearly has an unusual top in terms of the decor.
Our fans might torch and pitchfork me at the end of the way we both define the word artwork, but we'll see. It's unintentional.
Well, I was reaching for one of the Robert Getzel ones, but so is the rosewood on the back and sides Indian rosewood?
Yes.
Is this the D True Love?
No.
Sailor Jerry True Love? I think that would have already qualified for special editions, but so does this guitar have abalone shell inlaid around the fret insula?
No. 14 questions.
Okay. Does this guitar have an abalone purfling around the top?
No. 15 questions. Does Spoon always forget about this model? Yes.
Satin dreadnought, made in Nazareth. Doesn't have a sunburst.
Not that I'm rushing you, but
Is
if most of this 20 questions features this background, but the conclusion of this 20 questions features Spoon's original background, that means we had to wait until he got home to answer all these questions.
All right, you clearly got a good one. Does this guitar come with onboard electronics?
You might be able to add them, but no.
Okay. Wow. Spruce top. But something unusual about the top. Does this guitar have a black top?
No, but now I'm totally sure we're doing it the right way this week, because that's exactly how I felt last week, so I know this is the right formula. That was me last time.
Okay. 14 fret dreadnought, is that correct?
Yes.
Is this a custom shop guitar?
No.
14 fret dreadnought. Does it have a full dreadnought body depth?
It does.
Okay, full depth, satin finish. Something on the top that's not artwork, so it's not one of Robert's paintings. Is the feature of the top that made you kind of hedge on whether it's artwork or not, is it made of wood?
Boy, that's a loaded question. I don't know how to answer that. And I'm not trying to make you fail. I just don't know how to answer that. I won't charge you for that question. I don't know how to answer that question. I'd say no if pressed, but not. You'll see.
Apparently we will all see. I hope you have a photo of this available, because I'd like to see it for sure. All right, well, I only have one question left, and so I'm going to say, is this guitar currently still available for sale at Maury's Music?
As in stock? No.
Okay, well, you've stumped me. I think we've gotten 20 questions. I am at a loss.
YouTubers, are you watching us on the YouTube version of this program? Do you know what this is? Do you know that this guitar is the D28 Street Legend? Now, you're so famous on this program for forgetting about that model that I thought after you had hit 2 or 3 brick walls way before 10, it would automatically go right to the front of your brain. Do you see what I mean? Where it wasn't, the change on the top is wood, but at the same time it's printed, but it's not art, but it's not a special edition, but it's not paint, it's satin.
Judges, are we going to allow this? I say we get Tim Thiel on here and ask him if he thinks that's artwork, the amount of craftsmanship that went into the making of those stops.
Okay,
so the Street Legend is a D28, but as stated, it's got the catalyzed satin finish, and the top is a photorealistic depiction of an old D28, and it's actually pretty cool. I think it looks really cool. So it's got a lot of, wear in it like you would get from something like an authentic series aged model, except it's actually painted on the top. And it's a pretty remarkable achievement, because certainly till you get extremely close to it, you would never know that it's not the real deal. And I think that's pretty cool.
All right, Bob, let's get back on track here. We're going to tie in a nice segue. We just had a really rousing game of 20 questions that involved the Satin Top Martin guitar. And as we talked about on the top of this program, our friend Bob wants to know, how about we talk about gloss versus satin? I'm going to come at that from the point of view that whatever that could mean, we should probably try and touch on. Is the sound any different? Does the guitar look different? Does the guitar respond different? Would you know, Spoon, if there are any long-term effects if you have a gloss guitar versus a satin guitar? Is one going to hold up better? What version of that question do you want to tackle first, and see if we can't put that whole idea to rest, because they are not the same?
That's correct. They're not the same. But I'm also going to have the disclaimer that we're going to focus on Martin guitars, because we know more about the Martin finishes than other people's finishes. There's certainly different kinds of satin finishes out there. Some people call them matte finishes. And there's certain kinds of gloss finish. And most of the major manufacturers today don't use nitrocellulose, the old-fashioned finish that Martin uses. It's extremely volatile. And in fact, I'm currently in the state of New Jersey on a work assignment down near Cape May, and a little farther north from up in Cape May, in the area that's now Edison. In the early 20th century, there was a colossal cataclysmic explosion from at a site that made nitrocellulose, and that killed a lot of people. And it was one of those things that where people could hear the explosion in New York City and all that stuff. But in the town that used to be called Nixon, New Jersey, that's now called Edison, New Jersey. But it was an early 20th century horrible disaster. But anyway, it is a very volatile chemical. It requires a lot of patience and a lot of very careful chemistry and science and safety. And so it's not used that often, but it is one of the reasons Martin guitars sound the way they do, which then implies that Martin guitars that don't have that finish don't sound the same as those that have the nitrocellulose. And I think it's pretty obvious, going all the way back into the 1920s, 1930s, that the satin finished guitars that were used in the lowest priced Martins during the Great Depression era also did not have that, the full gloss finish, and they do sound different from the ones that that had the full gloss, not just full gloss, but the full nitrocellulose finish. So let's maybe we can just point out some things. So off the top of your head, name some models that are available today that are made with the satin finish.
Models today that are made with the satin finish from Martin, I would say the DSS 17 Whiskey Sunset. I'm going to dip back into that part of Martin guitar heritage that Spoon has no recollection of. The D28 Satin, the D18 Satin. And joking aside, not that long ago, Martin finally offered D28s and D18s in your choice of full gloss or satin finish, so those would count. Am I right to say the 15 series? I know they're not gloss.
That's correct. Yeah.
So something like a D15M would be that. I wouldn't be saying anything like the X series. There's a certain argument that those are not nitrocellulose gloss guitars, but there are times, not to point on anything bad or ugly, but we'd get an X series guitar in sometimes and have a little bit of a mark on it, and I would email my customer service rep internally, and I'd say, there's a problem with this finish. He said, no way, there can't be. There ain't a finish on that guitar. So that's another argument altogether. The X series, while you guys probably do know that they're not gloss, we're not going to even count them as satin because that's something all on its own.
It's a hand-rubbed finish. They started these with the Junior series, and they've expanded on that. It's a hand-rubbed finish that's basically, if I remember correctly, it's basically linseed oil. That's somehow involved if it's not just linseed oil. But you basically get a nice looking finish. What you don't get is a lacquer finish. It's not a lacquer. So you're not getting like a protective lacquer on the outside of it. So it's still a finish in the same way that any kind of furniture polish can be considered a finish, if you will. But yeah, so the 15 series is where they really came back in the modern era, and so you had a finish similar to what that was probably called a matte finish in the 30s that you had on the 17s and eventually on the 15s when there were some guitars that had 15 on the end of them back then that were not what you think of as a 15 series. The closest thing you came to that was the 17 series, the 0017 being a 14 fret model that's quite prevalent from the 1930s. That was essentially what we today would call a 0015. The first 15 that you would think of as a 15 being a mahogany guitar was the 015 that came out in 1940 and was Woody Guthrie called it the People's Martin because it was the lowest priced Martin available. So basically no cosmetics, no binding, no trim, and it was really just all about the woods. And then they brought those back with the modern 15s, which is the same idea. So a mahogany back, sides, and top, very little in the way of cosmetics, and even in the modern era, the herringbone rosette's actually a decal. And then the fretboards have changed over the years. They've gone from rosewood to, I forget what they went to, ebony, and but they basically have always been wood. 15 series has always been wood, but it's always had the satin finish. the modern 17 series, which was inspired by according to Chris Martin, by the mail order catalog guitars from the 1930s, like Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck. Those are lightly built, and they have the 15 series finish on them as well. So there you have spruce guitars, and it's very thin. It's a one-coat finish, so you can actually feel the wood through, through the finish, which is very cool. But so how would you say we don't today have any like high gloss mahogany topped guitars? The Graham Nash 000, whatever they called it, Graham Nash model, was a high gloss mahogany guitar. The old 17s that came out around the turn of the century, 2000, maybe a little before then, they were sort of upscale 15. So you got purfling, and you got a little more cosmetic, and you had the high gloss finish. But none of those are around anymore. So it makes more sense to compare the 17s to, let's say, the 16s or the standard series. How would you say that DSS slope shoulder dreadnought with a satin finish and a mahogany back sides and a spruce top, how do you compare that sonically to the full gloss guitars made with the same kind of woods?
To my ears, and we can also cite a cool video you and I did a few years back. If I can find it, I'll link to it in the description. We actually played a D18 versus D18 satin, but your question still remains the same. The difference I hear when you play a guitar with a satin finish against one with a gloss finish, there's something about the upper mid-range, and instead of being really cookie cutter and making this a really, painting with a broad brush, I don't want to just talk about guitars where it's bassy and muffled or bright and a lot of treble, but I want to divide the tone into bass, low mid-range, high mid-range, highs. There's something about the immediate attack in the high mid-range on a satin finished instrument that sounds louder and faster. And when I say faster, I mean if you're going to strum a chord across a guitar, something happens where it sounds bright and in your face and very direct, especially in the upper mids on satin, that sounds a little bit different on gloss. And what I really mean to say is the gloss has a little bit of a warmth, and maybe a bad example and a bad extreme case of this would be if you put a blanket over the sound and you made the guitar sound like it doesn't respond as clean and clearly. That's certainly an exaggeration, but something about satin almost lets the sound come out faster, more immediate, and it's got I almost want to say like a brand new set of strings versus that same set of strings a little bit later. There's a zing and an articulation to satin that at least when you first hit it, I don't know about the sustain or the overall voice, but the immediacy of satin is easily noticed. And I remember there was not to go on a tangent, but there was a custom shop. Somebody came to us and did a jumbo version of the D17, and that thing just had so much immediacy and clarity is what I keep thinking about when I think of satin.
Wow, I would have liked to have seen that guitar. I don't think I ever saw it. Bet you that would have made a pretty cool 12-string model as well. Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. I think the satin finished guitars, and particularly those lightweight 17s, you can just feel the guitar vibrate against your body. It's so alive and it's so resonant. And a full gloss finish grips the guitar more and holds it more in place. I think it makes it more reflective. It's still very thin wood. It's still obviously resonating. My guitar that's in this case right now is old enough now that it's amazingly resonant. But it's got the thin, it's got the high gloss finish, but it's a thin finish, and for the like you would have on the Authentics, and it's just so insanely resonant. But yeah, you get a very pleasing resonance, and I think it helps the 15s a lot. I think the big difference between the old 17s and the old 15s, the 17s sounded thunkier, and I don't want to use a negative word like deader, because I know people who really like the sound of their old 17s, but it definitely was not as open and airy and and vibrant a voice. And I think it helps those hardwood tops on a mahogany guitar tremendously. I think when the 16s were changed in the late 20th century, they came out in the 80s and through the 90s as kind of oddball series that had things the standard series didn't have. The mahogany models that were, they were mahogany models, but they had scallop bracing where the standard series still had non-scallop bracing. They had tortoise when the standard series had black, but they also made them in other alternative woods like maple and ash and whatnot. Mm-hmm. When they switched to what led to the modern 16s, and they became more of a economical choice out of Nazareth, and they changed the neck joint, and they also changed to satin finish, as they did even before that with the Rhodes series instruments and back then. And a lot of people, including myself, thought the sound difference, how you put it, like the fresh string, the zing to them, a kind of vibrancy that was different than a traditional Martin. But the sound difference was attributed by people like me to the mortise and tenon neck joint, and really didn't at the time stop and think about the effect that a satin finish on the back and sides would have. And I do, and in hindsight, think that was part of the difference. It wasn't just the neck joint difference. And today's 16s have a satin back and sides. And you can also now order them. I don't know when this started. It may have started at the same time of the Street Legends. You can order your 16s now with a satin top if you want. Yeah. And so it's tricky to talk about sound without wanting to leap to preferences and what's better. But just to point out, George Loudon's guitars are highly prized around the world, and his guitars have basically always had a satin finish. And there are other, major builders out there that have built with a non-gloss finish. They're not apples and apples and oranges because I don't know the chemistry of what Loudon's finish has been over the years. And it's probably not the same thing as what Martin uses. Today's Martin's non-gloss, non-nitrocellulose lacquer is a catalyzed lacquer, is what they call it. And I don't know what the chemical formulas involved in it are. But it's not exactly the same. It's still a lacquer. It's still protective. It's still, in both cases, nitrocellulose, one of the cool things about it is that it does allow the wood to breathe. It does allow the wood to move. And we've all seen the old vintage guitars that are just full of those micro cracks that they call finish checking. That can happen through sudden weather changes and stuff like that. But there's a lot of debate about that actually, or, you can go back to the old violins that have cost millions of dollars, that having that catalyzed, not the catalyzed lacquer, the nitrocellulose lacquer that ages and it gets all those little cracks in it, makes the wood vibrate. There's a lot of people who feel that satin finishes do that right out of the box and already have an openness that you don't get with a brand new nitrocellulose guitar. So it's definitely a matter of personal preference. I think the mahogany top guitars in the 15 series definitely sound better because of the satin finish. And the 17 series have their unique and very pleasing sound, very alive, and very, as you said, very quick out the sound hole. Sound, is due a lot to that very thin one coat satin finish.
Well, like that one scene on The Simpsons where Homer says, "Can I play devil's advocate?" And she says, "Yeah," and he goes and plays a devil's advocate pinball machine. Can I play devil's advocate and see if we can't get some flames going in the Patreon and on the YouTube version? I'm going to go on a tiny bit of a tangent. Blue Ridge guitars have a poly finish, and I'm going to really make a very, very general statement so this program doesn't go on way too long. But in general, we've had a lot of customers ask us over the years. They'd say they like the Blue Ridge BR 160, but it's kind of overbuilt, it's kind of overfinished. And this doesn't mean that this person's correct. I'm just saying it's not uncommon for our customers to say things like, that guitar seems a little bit overfinished, a little bit smothered is a bad exaggeration, but put yourself in that headspace. If a guitar's got too much finish on it, it's overbuilt and it's overfinished. And then if you go to a guitar that's not poly, not a heavy poly, but it's a light nitrocellulose, you hear the guitar more, it's not as suffocated. You go from that gloss to a satin version, even less so. Is it fair to say in general that the less the guitar is finished, I won't use the word better, the stronger it sounds and the more projective it becomes?
That's interesting. I'm a big believer in the fact that we all have our own vocabulary for sound, and what is bright to one person, means something to different people. And I often, quote back in the day, but long before the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum and all that, somebody was on one of those guitar forums and lambasting me and other people for having descriptive language about sound. He says, all I need to know is the guitar is warm or if it's bright, as if those are opposite ends of the same spectrum. And both of those words can mean a lot of different things to different people. But I actually said to him, but if a guitar is not warm, does that make it cool? And as a guitar, if it's not bright, does that make it dark? Because those would seem to be two totally different spectrums for me. So I will say they resonate in a different way. Is it more resonant? I've never, I don't know. I'm sure Martin has all the science when they, sit there with their spectrometers and all that stuff. And have all the background science that they never share with anybody very often. But I will say that George Harrison and John Lennon played Epiphone Casino guitars through a good chunk of at their height, let's say, post-Beatlemania, when they're into, the serious songwriting and all that. And all the way up until, Lennon playing it on the rooftop, his casino. But somebody had told them that, and they had sunbursts. They looked a lot like a sunburst ES-335, like the one Clapton played in the late 60s and early 70s. And somebody told them if you strip the finish off of them, they'll be a lot more resonant. So they did that. They took the finish totally off. And so that blonde guitar you see of Lennon's is the same guitar he played with the sunburst. It just had the finish removed.
Really?
And they felt it changed the sound of the guitars tremendously, made them a lot more resonant, and so there's definitely something to that. However, I think the guitars with the nitrocellulose, you used Fuller, I think was the word you used. I think the ones with the traditional high gloss nitro sound fuller than the ones with the satin finish. I think the satin finish ones have a different kind of resonance and sound. They project in a different way. I think they both project, but they project in a different way. And it's interesting because we're getting into areas where it's difficult, even for someone like me who's done it for a very long time, to try to put into words the differences between these guitars' sounds, because there's so many other factors. There aren't that many. We don't have any solid nitro, high gloss, all mahogany with a mahogany top and rosewood board and bridge guitars, out there right now to compare to the 15s. So it's hard to find two guitars that exactly qualify. The DSS 17s, the slope shoulder dreadnought, we don't currently have a high gloss mahogany Sitka slope shoulder dreadnought to do an A and B with. We definitely know that the thinner the finish on the nitro, the more resonant the guitars is, and the greater the sustain. They have the laboratory, experiments to prove that. However, as far as I know, I've never seen the science on the thin finish on a guitar that didn't have also hide glue construction. I'm sure they've done it. In fact, I know they've done it because I know they did the original D18 Authentic probably didn't have a finish as thin as the later Authentic series. Maybe they did. But they did definitely make D18 Authentics with tight bond and hide glue, and did blind sound tests, and which convinced Chris Martin that the sonic advantages of hide glue is a real thing.
Yeah.
So it's hard to do that. It's hard to make that, those kind of distinctions. I would say in general, I'll go back to my default. It is up to the listener of what they like, what they think sounds better. And I like the sound of traditional nitrocellulose Martins more than that. I think there's a fullness in the guts of it, in the low mids and maybe the mids into the low mids heading toward the bass, that I don't hear in that 17. But at the same time, that body's big enough that it's got plenty of bass. We're not talking about the fundamental notes of the guitar. Right. We're talking about the undertones and the overtones and the sympathetics and all of that ethereal stuff that Martin is famous for. So is there a difference? Definitely. A lot of people love the feel of Satin and don't like the feel of... have you had people complain about guitar Martins with high gloss being sticky, like on how the way your skin kind of sticks to it, in warm weather and all that?
I have had customers say, I would buy that if it had the neck that I could play. And I said, oh, the carve? He said, no. And I said, oh, the 1 11/16? He said, no. I was like, well, spit it out. No, it's the gloss neck. People, those people that hate the feeling of, let me slide from fret 1 to fret 3. It doesn't, just like NASFest. But if that's
muggy day.
Yeah, if that's our really charming way of riding the fence through that whole part of it, let me ask you the last question that really has to be addressed. Why would somebody put more? Why would somebody put more finish on a guitar if we think there's at least some benefit to making it very light and very less? The structural integrity and protection. Why do you finish a guitar at all? If this sounds so good, why don't you just build the guitar, skip the finishing part, and send it on its way? That would even be more projective. Well, because then you tap on the top with your fingernail, and there's a mark in it. I don't think I have to really ask you if you agree. I have to assume you will. If you put a nitrocellulose harder finish on a guitar, it's going to stand up to abuse a little bit better. Not somebody like me. I mean, I can go through nitrocellulose like some people can go through Satin. If you saw my guitar, you would know that it doesn't protect from everybody, but there's going to be a protection component to this too. And can you speak to that a little bit, Spoon?
Well, yeah, you already answered the question. It's about protection. There are other brands out there that put on much heavier finishes, but you mentioned the polyurethane that is on the Blue Ridge. I don't know for certain, but I would think polyurethane is probably much more common acoustic guitar finish than it's not these days. I don't remember. I know that Collings uses nitrocellulose, but I know the Collings that I bought in the 1990s clearly had a much thinner. It looked like a candy apple kind of finish to it, and clearly was a much thicker finish, and I think it definitely helped with that Collings laser beam note, very solid steel sounding notes, and also the fact that it had multiple steel rods in the neck didn't certainly helped there as well. But I don't know Collings these days enough to know if the finish has changed much since the 90s, because I do know they started going much more vintagey. They started offering vintage neck shapes, and they have all kinds of very sort of authentic-ish features available, including even a hand-applied varnish finish as an option. I don't know if it's the same thing that some people call a French polish on classical guitars, but it's probably similar. But I'm certain that Martin went with nitrocellulose because they considered it more protective than varnish. We're talking, circa 1900, whenever they started going to nitrocellulose, whenever it became available. But it's not as protective as a polyurethane finish. It's not as protective as even of other people's nitro, because the Martin finish is already very thin, and their thin finish is even thinner. And in fact, I know for a fact that the thin finish option for Martin, and that was used on the Authentics, is thinner than what Martin actually used in the 1930s. What they were going for was the whatever ridiculous small number of microns they were going for a finish that was 80 years old, that had worn away, that had dissipated and evaporated, or whatever happens to nitrocellulose. So if you bought a brand new D28 in 1934, it would have a thinner finish than the D28 authentic 1937 or whatever it is that you would buy today. But there is. I think when you look at guitars like Hudson Dalton, Collings, Bourgeois, Jim Olsen, people like that, no two of those makers are going to have the exact same finish with the exact same thickness or thinness and all that. And to quote Peter O'Toole, what was the question?
Were you?
Yes.
Well, the producer side of me wants to go on to the next segment, and I don't want to go there too soon. Do you think we've actually addressed, answered, and given satin versus gloss enough screen time today?
Well, yeah, it does look different. It feels different. People prefer one or the other. Definitely sounds different. I'm sure Martin would love to make you an HD28 with an all satin finish for you to find out yourself, alongside of the one with full gloss that you buy at the same time, and make that decision for yourself. I'd be curious to know which one you ended up selling, but I think I know which one I would end up selling. But I'll always, I think, prefer the nitro gloss nitro. But I will also prefer the thin finish version, which does dent very easily, so you can't start complaining about dings. One last note about that, because some of you may bring this up. They discovered recently through correspondence found in the Martin archives that the guitars in style 28 and below were not made with the full gloss finish of the 42s and 45s in the old days, in the 1930s and before the 1930s. It was a semi-gloss. It was a toned-down gloss, and that they referred to as satin, I think, in those days. So I want to make it very clear, it is the exact same finish as the high gloss. So we're not talking about the same thing. The stuff on the 28s that they now call vintage gloss in the authentic series in the 18s was this exact same finish. It's just buffed a lot less. It just has a lot less buffing in it. And it was really just a cost-cutting thing to not spend the time required to buff something up by hand I'm sure they used machines, like wheel-driven machines in those days, but they did spray it on by hand. They put it on by hand, and I have the exact formula used, and it is, it's basically the same nitro. It's just buffed differently. So that's different than today's satin finish that we're talking about, just to be clear.
Well, I can't put a bow on this part of the episode before I ask you, does that mean people who own a satin finished Martin guitar can buff it to a gloss?
It happens all the time. They do it all the time. People buff their headstocks. They love to have this headstocks buffed out. People buff the necks, even though the neck's going to buff up anyway if you play it, for 3 or 4 years. But there's definitely people doing it. I would say, as a caveat, do not over buff it, because it's not nearly as thick as the stuff they put on the gloss tops to buff to gloss. So you're going to be taking down that finish even thinner as you buff it out. So you want to be very careful if you want to buff out your 15 and make it nice and shiny, or your 17 or your 16. Just bear that in mind, that you'll run out of finish and could run into trouble. So be careful. But I know of many people who've done it.
And we have to be very careful if we're going to try to fit 2 topics in one episode. Thank you very much, Bob, for satin versus gloss. Anybody watching this on the YouTube version, please let us know in the chat, which one do you prefer? But JW brings another good point, and this is something I could speak to probably more now that we're closing down our store and I'm needing to maybe bring home the bacon in a little bit of a different way. He wants to know, how does somebody who plays guitar for a living keep it fun and make it not feel like a job? And I have some opinions on that, Spoon. Who should go first?
Well, I'll go first briefly, since I talked so much the last time. I just want to say, just the other night, I watched on YouTube, it's available on YouTube, a full concert of the Moody Blues at the Royal Albert Hall. and I'm pretty sure it was from 2018. It might have been 2017. And the drummer was having the time of his life. And he was so into it. And he was so, and unfortunately he's not with us any longer, but he was so clearly into the performance. This wasn't like, just because it was some reunion thing, they were doing a full tour and all that. And he was into what the other performers were doing. He was totally locked in and just smiling and laughing and just, and really getting off on, he was in the moment. He was in the song. And even though he wasn't the singer and he wasn't the guy playing the melody, he was telling the story of the song. And I would just say that's what it is for me. But you gig way more than I do. So I'm really curious to hear about you when people request the same song that they've requested every time you go, and you have to do it and that kind of stuff. How do you it's like being a Broadway actor. How do you do 8 shows a week and keep it fresh and keep it interesting and so you're on.
All right. Well, I will answer for both of us when I say we'd probably have to put this in a little bit of an asterisk. We're not literally two people who play for the living that you would think of if that's all we do and that's how all the money comes in. So at least I hope I could speak for Spoon when I say we play for a living at times, but we have other things to fall back on. Now, in my specific case, it's interesting. When I first got married, and I had been playing probably full-time 4 or 5 nights a week, if I remember correctly, it was like I had a steady Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday gig, and every weekend I played either Friday or Saturday. So I was making my full living at playing cover songs in local restaurants, and it wasn't the, making a living at, like, I'm going and playing a tour like Spoon just said, like the Moody Blues. Not my original music, and not something that, to me, that's another level of playing for a living. There are people who actually, tour on their own material. I never got to that level, but I was enjoying, maybe for a little bit more than a year and a half, playing in the evenings, and that was my income. The way I would answer it and put it in perspective, that was when I was in my late 20s. It was my first time doing it, so I didn't have 20 or 30 years of exhaustion or being sick of hearing certain requests. That whole thing was years and years into the future. So the times I was doing it for a living, I really, really enjoyed it. If there was any moment once in a great while where it felt like a job and it was hard to keep the enthusiasm up, where I didn't want to play that song again Saturday because I just played it every other night this week, that didn't really creep into my mindset. I was having so much satisfaction out of being, newly married. Everything's fun anyway. And I was playing in the evenings, and I had all day to work up new material, and I took the craft a little bit more seriously. And I spent my free time making sure that when I got in front of people, I was probably, let's be honest, on my game more for sure. If you're going to play Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 3 or 4 weeks, after a few months, let alone a few, over a year, it can really get to be well oiled. So that wasn't a problem for me. Then we ended up ramping up the store, and I ended up playing as a side income and a lot of things for free, and a lot of opportunities to play music where money wasn't involved at all. Fast forward to now, you're asking that question of me in 2024. We're retiring the Maury's music retail side of things, and this can sound convoluted, and even some of my closest friends don't exactly know what I mean when I say that. This is going to take a path very soon. We're going to be out of inventory, and I'm going to basically be selling, little trickling guitar orders and guitar parts orders, but this is not going to be my job anymore. Spoon and I are going to continue the podcast. Marshall and I are going to continue our Martin versus Martin concerts, but this isn't going to be an income for me anymore. That's why this listener-supported program is so important to us. I'm going to have to play more guitar in restaurants and do some more cover gigs than I ever used to, because now that's going to pick up some slack. And ironically, now that I know that, it feels like, I don't want to say I'm on stage and I'm just going through the motions and I'm not happy, but if I look at the calendar, I'm playing 4 or 5 times this month. You wake up and you're a little bit tired, you might have some allergies, or you don't feel like your voice is there. Little things that can make, I'll speak for me, that can make a gig less satisfying are fatigue. If I'm not feeling comfortable and I feel like I just sang last night and my voice isn't impressive, those kind of things creep in more when you know that you can't just not do it. I would never cancel a gig anyway. But the fact that your income relies on it, the truth is there certainly are feelings of, man, if I could move this gig into the distance and do it in a few more months, I certainly would. That does happen to me occasionally, but I'm more often than not, like the drummer Spoon mentioned a few minutes ago, that it's a love. I hope people who see our videos, whether it's the NASFest stuff or or even our demos and me doing something on YouTube, if I didn't love it, you would certainly see it. So I don't know how Spoon, how often you go and play a gig where that creeps up into your mindset, but I can't say that it happens that much for me.
It's interesting. I don't perform nearly as much as I used to, but like for instance, Chinatown, people ask me to do that a lot, and I still do it, and I think in the moment, I like telling that story, and I like that, and it's and whether this is as David Crosby used to say, it's not because I'm a jazz genius that it comes out different every single time. So, and I've learned that that's just how I did it this time. So there's no perfect way to do it. But I remember seeing Neil Young in 1986, maybe. And I just remember I had to play hooky from a dress rehearsal well, it wasn't dress rehearsal, play rehearsal, to go see him. And he was talking about a song that he got to the point where he couldn't roll down his car radio without hearing the song, and he just grew to hate the song and never wanted to play it again, and swore he would never, ever, ever play it again. But, 20 years later or so, he went back to playing Heart of Gold. I'm sure people get tired of songs. I saw Jackson Browne at Radio City in probably 87, and somebody yelled out "These Days," and he actually stopped and explained that he doesn't do that song anymore. And I, instead of, which I thought was kind of bad, kind of put that person on the spot, saying I don't do that song anymore. But for much the same reasons. And I'm sure a lot of artists, there's songs that they retire just because they get tired of them. I go see my friends Life in a Blender in New York City all the time, and there's lots of songs from their albums back from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that I would love to see them do. And it's always fun when they pull something out, but they're much more interested in doing mainly new material. There's a few chestnuts that they know people want to hear. But I think that's part of it. People, mixing up their repertoire, and my friend Bill Peoples in Ohio, who doesn't actually gig so much, but he's playing constantly, and he's one of those guys that basically in his mind, all he needs is to be out there with his fire pit and the Almighty, and he's got his audience, and he's perfectly. And he loves playing the songs, but even he gets tired of songs, and will retire songs and wants to learn new stuff, and then we'll go back to what he and basically see it with fresh eyes and find new ways to do it. So I think that's an interesting question. I think the real answer to the real question, when you're talking about people who make their living at it, like somebody with Jackson Browne who's touring for 100 dates or whatever it is a year, not let alone somebody like Bob Dylan, it is, that's one of the differences between them and us. That's one of the differences between a soap opera actor and an actor who does community theater or even live theater, to be able to show up for work every day, hundreds of days a year, and whether you're rehearsing or, of course, soap opera actors don't get time to rehearse, but when they have to be on, and they have to be in the moment, and they have to be the character, and they have to, like those guys doing 8 shows a week on Broadway. Of course, you're going to have off nights. Of course, you're going to be tired. Of course, your voice is not going to be perfect every night. But, I don't think I could ever be a touring artist, because my singing voice can't last 2 days in a row without, I guess that makes me a diva. I'm more like the opera singers who have to take several days off between performances, but because of my precious voice. But I think that's a lot of it. I think it takes a certain kind of person or personality to get through those slogs when things become a slog, and realize. And this is something I've used to tell actors when I directed plays, that today's audience hasn't seen this before, and we owe them the best. We owe them the best performance. I don't care if only 3 people showed up. That's, they paid to come see you, and the fact that they're not some big agent, or that the house isn't full, doesn't mean they should get a show any less. And I love seeing there's some wonderful videos out there of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. That's David Bowie for you youngsters out there, playing a school gymnasium, with the wild hair, and Mick Ronson with his stack and his Les Paul, and they're playing a school gymnasium for like 25, young people, in very conservative outfits and stuff that were, half of them weirded out by these freaks that they were seeing, but they kicked ass. I don't know if you have to bleep that on these or not, but yeah, it's David Bowie. Just watched Keith Richards today on a video of him coming up to the mic and singing a song with the Stones, and then that got me cooking, and I went back and was watching some Expensive Winos, his band that he had with Neville and Waddy Wachtel and those guys, and Bill Lee for a while on bass and stuff. But there's a guy who's played 1 million shows and absolutely loves being in front of an audience, absolutely loves telling a story, absolutely loves kicking it out regardless of what shape his voice is in and whatnot. Does he have bad days and slow days and days where he's like, I really don't want to be here, I'd much rather be on the beach? Probably. But, I wish I knew the answer, because I don't think I would be able to do that kind of steady performance and have to sing Heart of Gold 18,000 times a year. But I'd like to give it a try. Somebody wants to hire me and send me out.
Let's put that to the test. But yeah, and I could go back to my story about doing it full time back in the late 90s. If I had any moment during some of those gigs, it was like, I could be working in a factory again. If I don't want to do this, and I don't want to sing and play guitar and have some free drinks and have tips and make this my living, I could shovel coal again, or whatever it was. I didn't work in a coal shoveling factory, but it's a quick tangent. I am, and we just talked about this the other day. I have played a lot in August, and we're recording this program in the middle of the month. It's the getting all your gear there, setting it all up, making sure it's not working, making sure it will work in an hour, and then tearing it all down and traveling with it. It's nowhere near the big, the Jackson Browns and the Bob Dylans, where you got to take this show and move it from city to city. But moving your gear from your home into this restaurant, making sure it's working, getting it home, that's what we get paid for. And we often make the joke, at least my drummer and I, we would probably go and do next weekend for like $15 if somebody would move all this crap and set it all up and be able to walk out, make sure your guitar's in tune, because somebody's done that for you already, play these songs, go home with your guitar, and all the other stuff is taken care of. And not that it's a lot of stuff, but there are some nights, and if you just played Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and now Friday and Saturday again, by that second Saturday, you're sick of moving that stuff. So it's not even necessarily singing Heart of Gold. It's like Heart of Gold and then 2 more songs, and then we got to move all this stuff, and it sounds lazy. And of course, if I didn't get that exercise, I would get none, because I'm not bike riding as much as I should. But that's part of if any of it creeps into like, oh, this is a job, that's the job,
Well, JW, that's your answer right there. The secret is to have a manager and a production company behind you, so you can just pull up in your bus with the other bigwigs in your Crossfields Nash Young band pulling up in their own buses, because nobody can stand to be on the same bus, and you and all you have to do is walk out. Like I saw Keith Richards today with the expensive winos from like 20 15 or whenever it was, him walking out on stage, saying hi to the audience, reaching back, just kind of reaching back for the person who's about to drape him with a guitar and give him his pick, and then turn up, and then off they went. And I'll tell you one thing, one of the hardest things for me when it comes to performing in modern times with aging hands is carrying my guitar everywhere. And that's why I now use these. In the background, you guys can, if I don't know if you can see this on the long shot or not, but there's a case back there with the guitar I brought down here. That's actually one of those fancy Blue Ridge padded cases that I bought from Maury's Music in Coaldale, Pennsylvania, because some people would upgrade to solid cases, and they had some of these laying around. But I upgraded to soft cases whenever possible. But, you know, I can flat guarantee you Jackson Browne and Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton stopped carrying their own guitars a long time ago. And somebody else, all that's done for you, I'm sure that helps make it a little easier. So that's it, JW. Get working on getting that production company and that manager, and you'll be in the clear.
Although, quick side note to that whole thing, I know our good friend Chris Davis saw Steve Morse at the Iridium years ago. I don't know if he saw the Dregs or if he saw some other version of that band, but something happened where, I don't remember why, but they needed to bring more PA in at the last minute or something was failing. And Steve Morse was one of the guys hauling gear out of the truck. And he was like, wow, I'm sure you can get out of that if you want to. And that's points for me. If you see somebody that's going to be on stage like that, Steve Morse is actually humping gear. I wonder if Bob Dylan would help unload the truck if he had to.
Not at 82 or however old he is now, but yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, when I ran into Leo Kottke in front of Town Hall, you know, and he was carrying 2 guitar cases, in a bag. He was, clearly his own roadie, nice. and own chauffeur too. But there again, somebody had been playing forever, and he, he can't go a week without having to play 8 Miles High or, some of these other songs that he's done for a zillion years. And, clearly still enjoys it. Is there some of it that, he still needs to pay the bills with it? Sure, of course. But I think the secret is staying in the moment and there's that commune you have with your audience that... Yep. That I feel every time, even in the noisiest bars, because long ago somebody told me you don't hear the people who are listening to you, and don't, just the fact you'll recognize that when they, applaud, not when they're, people in the background are throwing bottles at each other or whatever. But I did actually, I did the Cheese Beads. We performed in a cage at a bar. I can't remember where it was, but we performed in a bar that actually had the band in a cage.
You got Blues Brothers.
We didn't attract, just about. We didn't attract the kind of crowd that required the cage, but we did play in a cage.
Wow.
But
I was going to say, it's almost like that old thing with golf, like that one shot that keeps you coming back. It's that one song or even that one part of one song. If you're not having the best gig and it feels like a job at that moment, there's going to be that one song when you have 2 hours to think about it while you're tearing down. The only bad part of that analogy is I don't have those shots at golf that make me want to come back. That's why I quit. But that's not for this podcast. And I really do want to say thank you, JW. That was a good topic. And hopefully you guys don't mind if on occasion we round up a couple of topics, make them into one and get an hour out of it. So I'm not sure if either one of those could have really deserved an hour's worth of talking. But I hope you didn't walk away from this episode feeling like we squished either one too bad. I probably don't have any more really stories of worth that wouldn't just be repeats of the same thing I've said about playing gigs, but I can at least say I'm a bad example of somebody who should talk about this feeling like a job, because I'm very, very fortunate that it doesn't. Now, this podcast, does this feel like a job when you're on the beach and you're like, oh, man, it's almost 12 o'clock. I got to get out of my sand chair and put my beer away or at least hide it off camera. You'd have to ask Spoon for that.
Well, to be honest, I am not on the beach. I'm down near a beach. I only get to see the beach on the weekends. I'm here to work, but I got a gig down here. But yeah, it is, even Martin Fest, there's been times where it's like, oh man, I got to put all this pack together and I got to go to Martin Fest. I really want to do this. And then you get there and of course you want to do it. You can't wait when it's over. You can't wait for it to come back. And I think a lot of us still feel that way about gigs. But But I think if you're really lucky enough to have to worry about things getting old and tired, feeling you're gigging that much, mixing it up. You don't have to play the same set every time. I got bless him. I got to say, saw Chris Christopherson at the Bottom Line, so he was already pretty old, but we're still going back in the 1980s probably, and 1990s, and just him and a drummer and a guy on keyboards and played some guitar too that had a big hat and dark glasses and a big beard, so you couldn't really tell what he looked like, but Christopherson played every request. Basically instantly. He played every request that people asked, crammed them in. He would end one song like how they used to call him Jody and the kid, thank you. And then would go and switch his harmonica or whatever because he crammed as many songs into his set as possible. It was pretty cool. He sat right next to Don. Was. And Natalie Merchant was in the back kind of peering around a pillar. But anyway, you talk about being in the moment. He would drop it like that. He would drop and go on, do business, try to get set up for the next song, move on to the next song, which was a little just, kind of disorienting at first. But when he was in the song, he was Sunday Morning Coming Down. How many times have that guy had to sing that? And he could still make you cry, Again, how did they do it? I think that's again, kind of the difference between him and me, I'd put it that way. But cool stuff.
Thank you again, JW, and thank you, Bob, for the great topics. Tune in next week when we probably visit another viewer request, because this whole season is going to be at least loosely based on your ideas at the end of season 4. What should we talk about? You keep telling us, we'll keep trying to do it, and we hope you had a good time here today. From all of us at Martins and More, thanks for listening.
Hear you later.